Welcome to another wonderful Susannah Calloway audiobook. We are excited to have you with us. Before we begin the story, please like and subscribe to our channel and share it with friends. This allows us to continue adding free clean Western romance audiobooks for you to enjoy. The following title is copyrighted by Susannah Calloway, Western romance author. Now, find a comfortable spot, relax, and enjoy the story. The Bride's Choice. Chapter 1. Betsy sighed, hoping the stagecoach would be stopping soon. It had been hours since their last stop to change horses, and she desperately needed to use an outhouse. If they didn't stop soon, she didn't know what she might do. Her mother and father both stared out the coach windows at the desolate scenery passing by, and she turned her head to gaze out at the stubby buffalo grass. In her opinion, the sparse vegetation hardly seemed fit to feed the roaming buffalo herds or the antelope that bounded away on light hooves as the stage and its team of 6 galloped by. There were a few stunted trees dotting the landscape, with piles of rock formations that seemed oddly out of place. Betsy hoped their homestead, their new home there in Wyoming Territory, held more promise than this barren wasteland. Plum River. The name seemed pretty enough. Perhaps it indicated groves of plum trees beside a cool, broad winding river that teemed with fish that gleamed like diamonds under the summer sun. Since she first learned about the great and wild West in school, Betsy dreamed of moving out there, to live among the wilderness and the men who tried to tame it. She'd turned 18 a few months ago, had received no offers of marriage. 18 was so old to be an unmarried woman, and Betsy feared that in her hometown of Youngstown, Ohio, she would never find a husband. She despaired and grew angry by turns, watching her friends snag husbands while she became an old spinster. Why, that no-account Marcy Simpson was not only married but had 2 children by the time she turned 18. And Marcy came from a family with a questionable reputation, too. Whereas the Coe family's name was well respected in Youngstown. Carefully eyeing her mother, Betsy picked up the well-folded newspaper and reread the part that advertised for mail-order brides. Men in gold towns, in cattle towns, in silver towns, and any kind of town that had few women in it, had written adverts. What women resided in those places were unmarriageable, for they were mostly local ladies of the night and tavern women. Undesirable as either wives or mothers. These men needed brides to marry, and they begged in their letters for young women from back east to come west. Men needed women to help maintain a household and bear their children. When Betsy asked her mother about it, Jane Coe had flatly refused. She wasn't about to permit her daughter to write any of those men. "You don't know who they are or anything about their families," she had declared. "You might marry a rogue or a black sheep. A proper lady marries a man of good name who will take care of her and her children." Her mother stirred on the bench seat, forcing Betsy to hide the newspaper behind her back. Jane pressed her hand against Betsy's brother John's forehead. Her mouth pursed in disapproval. "His fever is back," she said, her tone dark. "I told you we should have returned to Ohio before we entered Iowa." Her father, also named John, shook his head, swiveling a disapproving eye in his wife's direction. "Are you starting with that again? What do we have to go back to? I have no job. Do you want us to live with your parents? I will never be able to hold my head up again." Jane sniffed without replying. John the younger turned his head toward her. "I'm fine, Ma. I think moving west was a fine idea," Brett stated. Brett was 16 and carried himself like a man. Already taller and broader than their father, Brett looked forward to working the land, farming, and maybe raising some cattle and pigs. He wanted to marry a nice farm girl in Plum River and build a house on a plot of land he could call his own. Papa carried the written claim for 360 acres in his pocket. He had agreed to share the land with his sons if they couldn't homestead on their own. Yet with few settlers encroaching into Wyoming and instead heading for finer lands in Oregon and California, Papa told them they would have no trouble gaining, in time, plots of land for themselves. "You are not fine, Johnny," Ma snapped. "And you, Brett, hold your tongue, and speak when you are spoken to. I didn't spend years raising disrespectful children." Betsy thought it wise to remain silent when her mother was in one of her snits. Of course, Ma never called it a snit. For her, it was a mood, and her current mood was snippy. Nor did her mother ever fail to deliver a tongue lashing while captured within it. Papa returned to his morose gazing out the carriage window while Brett sulked, and young John opened a dime novel to read. He was 12 and read everything he could get his hands on. At the moment, they were the only passengers aboard the coach as the horses took them west. Across the long miles, other passengers had boarded and traveled with them before reaching their destinations. Since the crossing onto the vast plains of Wyoming, there had been no others in the coach even though it could carry 9 passengers, luggage, mail, the driver and the man who rode shotgun. They traveled anywhere from 60 to 70 miles in a day, and Betsy had long since surrendered up the joy of moving west. They had bounced along rough, sometimes rocky, and often muddy trails for the last 2 weeks. The coach passed through wilderness and towns, encountering horrible thunderstorms. Terrible heat and driving winds blew gritty sand into the carriage, not to mention the biting insects that never seemed to die no matter how hard they were slapped. Betsy half wondered why she had ever wanted to move west in the first place. The man riding shotgun, whose name was, he informed them laconically, Shotgun, bent down to yell through the window. "Changing station comin' up, folks." Betsy blew out a breath of relief. She not only needed to relieve her bladder, but she also craved to stretch her legs and back. Changing horses took about 15 minutes, not near enough time to get the kinks out, but she would take what she could get. Sticking her head out the window, she saw the building with its corrals of horses straight ahead. As the driver slowed his tired team from a swift trot to a walk, she noticed a man standing in front of the building, watching them approach. Chapter 2. As soon as the coach stopped, Shotgun leaped nimbly down from his seat and opened the door. Tipping his hat, he murmured, "Ma'am," as Betsy rose stiffly from her seat. Hiking her skirts, she descended the narrow steps to the ground. Her glance chanced upon the young man waiting there, and as her eyes met his, he took off one of those newfangled Stetson hats, and offered her a quick bow. She hustled past him, lifting her skirts and petticoats, determined to find the outhouse before she humiliated herself. Ma was waiting next, and gave Betsy a chilling gaze as she exited, as though Betsy should have let her go first. Her relief and exquisite pleasure, Betsy stretched her arms over her head as she walked toward the station, hearing her spine's audible pop. She sighed, wishing for a relief for her backside and shoulders, but settled for the ability to walk her stiffness out. The station manager and the driver had already unhitched the sweaty team, and led them away to water and feed, 3 horses to each man. Their harnesses jingled musically in beat with their heavy hooves. Shotgun talked in low tones to the young man. As Betsy walked up, they ceased their conversation and tipped their hats respectfully. "How far is it to Plum River?" she asked. "Why, 100 miles, miss," said Shotgun. "We should reach it by tomorrow." "Thank you." Before Betsy walked away, she hesitated, catching the young man's eyes. They were blue, like the Ohio sky, and clear. His face, while rugged and tanned, held a strong handsomeness that she always suspected the cowboys of the West should have. His light brown hair under his Stetson hung to his shoulders. Those shoulders were tough and broad, in a plain brown cotton shirt, and impressed her with their vitality. His trousers were of leather, and he wore heavy cowhide boots up to his calves. He may have been a few years older than she, but not much more, she thought. Offering him a slight smile, she walked away to watch the station manager and the driver hitch the new team to the stagecoach. These horses were, of course, large and sturdy, their sleek, dark hides gleaming under the sun. She stroked the soft nose of the Will gelding, letting him whiffle her fingers, his dark eyes in his blinders indulgent and kind. His jaws worked his bit for a moment before opening in a huge equine yawn. His grassy breath filled her nostrils as she giggled, the bit lying across his muscular, pink tongue. "You're a silly one," she told him, her hand stoking down his thick, warm neck. The gelding nodded his mute agreement before yawning again, munching his bit as he nuzzled her, perhaps asking for a carrot. "Betsy." Ma's stern voice commanded her immediate attention. With a sigh, she turned her attention from the big gelding to her diminutive mother, standing near the coach with her usual imperious expression. "How many times have I told you to not touch animals?" Ma asked, annoyed. They are filthy. Just filthy. Ma, it's a horse. And a horse is a disgusting animal. If there were any decent facilities here, I'd insist you wash your hands. Yes, Ma. I raised you better, Betsy, her mother went on, droning endlessly in one of her torrid explanations of how terrible the world was. As usual, Betsy tuned her out, nodding at the right places while eyeing the young man who had tossed his suitcase and bags up to Shotgun. Shotgun tied them down atop the coach, calling down a jest to the young man, who laughed in response. He had very fine white teeth, Betsy observed. You can catch any number of diseases by touching animals, her mother stated firmly. Do you want to catch a disease, Betsy? No, Ma, Betsy replied automatically. The last horses were hitched, the station manager retreated into his hovel, and the Coe family climbed back into the coach. Shotgun and the driver climbed to their perches, as the young man in the Stetson hesitated before entering through the door. Do you mind if I? Of course not, Papa declared before Ma could protest and insist he ride up on top. Come in, young man, come in. More than enough room in here. Betsy noticed her mother's sour expression, and she had no doubt the young man saw it as well. Yet, he took off his hat in the presence of ladies and introduced himself. I'm Carson Davis, he said, his accent a low, southern drawl. I'm headed to Plum River where I hope to become a cattle rancher. Mr. Davis, Papa said, his tone expansive. This is my wife, Jane. I am John Coe, and these are my children. Betsy, Brett and young John. With each introduction, Carson offered a smile and a tiny handshake, yet his eyes lingered on Betsy. While she was yet 18 years old, she instantly recognized the interest a man had for a woman he liked. She blushed under his scrutiny, feeling heat rise to her cheeks. If this young man intended to reside in Plum River. But you have no land there, Mr. Davis? Ma demanded. No property? Davis's face grew faintly pink. Why, yes, ma'am, I have a deed to property. A small homestead. And cattle? How many herds do you own, Mr. Davis? Carson Davis dipped his chin. None yet, ma'am. But I aim to change that real soon. Bah. Ma snorted, turning her face toward the window. Papa eyed him with disappointment and also stared out of the coach at the changing scenery, rolling hills dotted here and there with clumps of scrub oak, aspen, and pine trees. No doubt he ignored the bright blossoms of wild roses, the birds flocking from the grass to rise high in the sky, the leaping rabbits that sought escape from the trotting horses and the stagecoach. While her parents seemed less than thrilled by Mr. Davis's prospects, Betsy was intrigued. Here was a real cattle rancher, sitting opposite her in the coach. Maybe he didn't have his cattle yet, but she guessed he knew all about punching cows and branding and even rustlers. A quick flick of her eyes showed her mother nodding off, and her father still engrossed in the passing scenery. How her mother managed to sleep in the rocking coach was beyond her, but that was fine with Betsy. Betsy cleared her throat delicately. So, Mr. Davis, she ventured. Where are you from? Kentucky, ma'am, he replied. Looking to change my fortune out west. So are we. We're from Ohio, Brett said. Our father has a claim to over 300 acres of good farmland in Plum River. Carson smiled. I bet we're neighbors then. I'll get my own land, too, Brett stated firmly. And find a good woman to marry. I reckon you and I have that in common, Carson said, his blue eyes on Betsy. She blushed, smiling, feeling a shiver of sweet anticipation wiggle through her. Maybe Carson Davis would want to marry her. She certainly liked his kind eyes and warm smile. He had an easygoing way about him that suggested he would never abuse his wife. She, and most everyone in Youngstown, knew about the husbands who regularly beat their wives with buggy whips or crops. Her father never beat her mother, of course, but she had heard of those few who did. Are there many women in Plum River, Mr. Davis? She asked. I don't rightly know, ma'am, he replied. It's a small town that sprung up from the prairie when the Cheyenne Indians were run off. When the government offered land for homesteading in the territory, folks like you settled there to farm it. And ranchers like you? I believe so, he said. Plenty of grass for grazing. Betsy gestured at the thin buffalo grass outside the coach window. That doesn't look fit to feed a single sheep, much less a herd of cattle. Can it? Carson nodded thoughtfully as though giving full weight to her question. It sure don't look like much, Miss Coe, but it has kept the buffalo thriving on it. If the buffalo can stay fat on it, so can cattle. Betsy liked how he didn't make her feel small or stupid when she displayed her ignorance. She had so much to learn about this new world she entered, and her natural curiosity bubbled up in a storm of questions. Carson answered them all, including Brett's inquiries also, as the hours and miles brought them closer to their future. Betsy found herself more and more comfortable with him and liked him with an increasing enjoyment. Darkness had fallen when the stage pulled into a station whereby the Coe family and Mr. Davis could disembark, eat a hot meal and spend the night. Their lodging was a barn, but the hay was soft and fragrant, and Betsy knew she would sleep soundly all night. Yet, as Ma and her brothers settled down, Papa took Betsy aside. "Girl, I don't want you carrying on with that boy," he said, his tone stern. "He has no prospects, no cattle, and certainly is no match for you." Disappointed, hurt, and a little angry, Betsy said, "Yes, Papa." She displayed outward obedience but inwardly rebelled. Carson Davis is a fine match, she thought as she went to her bed, a blanket atop the hay. The night was warm, and she needed nothing other than her shawl to sleep comfortably until dawn. Chapter 3. The coach pulled into Plum River late the next afternoon, and Betsy and her brothers, too excited for decorum, leaned out the windows to watch the town approach. Small, somewhat dull-looking houses with tiny gardens lay scattered among narrow dirt lanes. A few children yelled and waved, dashing to follow the stage as the driver trotted the team down the packed dirt road of the main street. Signs on clapboard buildings announced the assayer's office, Johnson's Mercantile, and the Hideaway Saloon with its batwing doors. Ladies stood on the balcony above the saloon, watching the street below. Men on horseback rode in either direction while buckboard wagons trundled behind harnessed teams. Betsy saw the sheriff's office and a small building that informed passers-by that this was the Plum River Express Courier. Crowds gathered as the coach slowed, approaching the stage and telegraph office. Betsy noticed the crowds were mostly men in rough workman's clothing, but there were also a few women in skirts and petticoats with sunbonnets on their heads. Voices hailed the driver and the shotgun for news. They seemed to greet Betsy's family as though they were long-lost cousins. A tall man in a black frock coat and a top hat opened the coach door. His dark eyes met Betsy's for a long moment before sweeping the hat off in deference to the ladies on board. "Welcome to Plum River," he said, handing Betsy down, then her mother. Papa, Mr. Davis, and her brothers followed. Betsy tried taking in everything at once, holding young John's hand so he wouldn't wander off and get lost amid the laughing, babbling crowd. The air felt hot and dry, and she could smell the odors of coffee and cooking from the nearby two-story hotel. The driver and shotgun unloaded the mail first, tossing the bag down to the arms of the waiting men, who took it inside the office to open and distribute. Then down came the luggage and bags, which Brett and Papa sorted through, setting theirs aside. "I'm going to find out where our property is," Papa said. "Sit here in the shade and wait for me." He headed down the dusty street to the assayer's office. Ma sat down on the bench outside the stage office, fanning herself as the people of Plum River collected their mail and gradually dispersed. Mr. Davis, after a quick deferential nod to Ma, followed Papa, no doubt on the same errand. Betsy, too sore and too excited to sit, paced about, gazing at the people and buildings, marveling at her first town in Wyoming Territory. The coach driver returned to his seat and drove the team around the street corner, likely to unharness them. "Afternoon, ladies." Betsy turned, seeing the tall man who had greeted them earlier. He tipped his hat, smiling. "I am Travis Duggan, proprietor of the Plum River Express Courier." Ma actually smiled warmly. She accepted his handshake, and said, "I am Mrs. Coe. This is my daughter, Betsy. Of course, my sons Brett and John." "Betsy," he said, lingering over her hand. What a delightfully pretty name. Betsy offered him a small curtsy, returning his smile. Thank you, sir. May I ask where you folks are from? Youngstown, Ohio, Ma answered. We have a home and land awaiting us here. A very long and arduous journey, ma'am, Mr. Duggan said. It is fortunate you arrived safely. What with the dangerous roads, snakes, and wild Indians? Ma shuddered delicately. Yes, indeed, Mr. Duggan, and we very nearly turned back as our young John here had a fever. Just then, Papa returned, a frown on his face, his brow furrowed. He shook hands with Mr. Duggan when Ma introduced them. He turned to her. Our home is 5 miles outside of town, he said. It will be dark soon, and we cannot walk there before the night falls. You mustn't travel out on the prairie at night, Mr. Duggan said. Not on foot. It's far too dangerous. If you wait until morning, I'm sure there will be someone with a wagon headed out that way. You can hitch a ride. Papa shifted his feet, clearly uncomfortable in telling Mr. Duggan that they had little money for staying at the hotel. Betsy knew from overhearing her parents talk that the trip west had taken nearly all they had saved, and what little remained must be hoarded. Thank you, Mr. Duggan, Papa said. Perhaps you are right. We will find a place to sleep. We have a little food with us. The newspaper man clearly understood their situation, for he said, the livery stable will permit travelers to sleep in the barn for 6 bits. That's a small payment for all of you, and no doubt there you can find a means to get out to your homestead. Will you permit me to assist you? I'm not looking for charity, sir. Consider it my welcome to Plum River, Mr. Duggan said. I have a loaf of bread, some hard-boiled eggs and cheese I would like to offer you if you will accept it. Papa nodded, gratitude and shame warring across his face. I'm in your debt, Mr. Duggan. Nonsense. Please wait here. I won't be but a few minutes. Betsy's stomach rumbled. She had had nothing to eat, none of them had, since the night before. The food in their bags had to see them to their new home and beyond while they scrounged for whatever they could find or hunt. It was early June, and her father and brothers would have to work hard to get a crop in. She and her mother would plant a garden, raise some chickens, and maybe obtain a few suckling pigs. If they were to survive the harsh Wyoming winter, they had to begin work immediately. Mr. Duggan returned, carrying a very full gunny sack. The people in Plum River look out for one another, he said, handing the sack to Papa. We're all friends and neighbors, and you'll be able to trade for the things you'll need. Thank you, Mr. Duggan, Papa said, his tone gruff. I'll repay you. I have no doubts. Meanwhile, let me accompany you to the livery stable. As they walked down the street, Betsy couldn't help but wonder where Carson Davis was. She hadn't seen him since he followed Papa to the assayer's office. Maybe he left right away to walk to his own homestead, though his bags were still on the sidewalk by the stage office. Mr. Duggan spoke about the town and its inhabitants, yet his eyes strayed to Betsy more than once. He made her feel slightly uncomfortable, and she wondered if he was married. There was no ring on his finger, and he hadn't mentioned a wife. She found she liked him, for he was obviously a very kind and generous man, and not too bad looking. His teeth were straight and white, and he had a strong chin and jaw. Yet, she didn't like him as much as she liked Carson Davis. Yet if this man were interested in her, she knew her parents would approve the match. He was prosperous with a business, and he appeared to have a standing within the town. Travis Duggan left them after introducing them to the livery owner, Ted Jones, who took the coins Papa gave him and showed them to the loft in his barn where they would stay the night. They ate the feast of fresh bread, the boiled eggs and the cold sliced roast Mr. Duggan slipped in the sack. With her stomach full, Betsy snuggled into the clean hay, and fell asleep listening to the horses in their stalls below. Chapter 4. We'll have to walk to our homestead, Papa told the family as they ate a quick breakfast of bread and cheese, washing it down with cold water from the well. We can't count on a ride. I'm ready, Papa, Brett said, and Betsy nodded, unable to talk through her full mouth. Ma frowned, brushing young John's hair back from his face. I don't think Johnny can walk that far. I'm strong, Ma, Johnny said. I'm all well now. Don't you worry. As Ma got ready to argue, Mr. Jones, the livery owner, came in, a large sack in his hands. Glad to see you folks have rested well. Now let me harness my team, and I'll be obliged to give you a ride to your homestead. And this here is from my wife. He set the sack down, opening the neck to display a good amount of food inside. I told her about you folks spending the night in our barn, and she spent half the evening gathering this up for you. Thank you, Mr. Jones, Papa said slowly. I must decline. I can't pay you. Mr. Jones snorted, waving Papa's words away. My wife be a good Christian woman, and we have been blessed with plenty. You have young ones to feed, and you're just starting out and all. But the trip. I have to go out that way anyhow. Gotta pick up a filly a few miles beyond your place. Then we will be delighted to accompany you, Mr. Jones, Ma said, brushing hay from her dress. And please thank your wife from us. We are beholden to you both. John, you and Brett help him harness his horses. Betsy and I will load the wagon with our things, including this good food, if you'll show us where the wagon is, Mr. Jones. It be right there, Mrs. Coe, that there buckboard. Just load your belongings, and we'll be on our way soon. Betsy helped load the wagon, and then assisted Johnny up into the bed before climbing up herself. Ma took the seat beside Mr. Jones, while Papa and Brett joined them. Mr. Jones clucked to the team, and they started off down the main street of town. There were a few people out and about that early, most with smiles and waves toward Mr. Jones and his passengers. Betsy caught her breath. There was Carson James, emerging from the Johnsons' mercantile door. She wanted to shout and wave to him, but her father's eyes were on her. So, she sat quietly and watched the handsome man fade into the distance. Mr. Jones deposited them at the gate of their homestead in what seemed to be an endless sea of greenish-brown grass. He helped unload their belongings, touched his hat and started his team trotting briskly up the road. Papa and Ma simply stared at the dilapidated buildings in shock. This was not what they sent me, Papa said, his voice dull. This can't be our home. I told you, we shouldn't have come, John, Ma snapped, her face pale. All our money gone, and we've traveled halfway across the country, and for what? Trapped with this place. We should never have left Ohio. Ma began to cry, trying to hide her face against her own shoulder as her sobs racked her. Papa didn't try to comfort her but stared at the house with its shutters hanging off, the wood siding cracked and broken. Brett patted Ma's arm without speaking, his face a picture of utter disappointment. I think it's beautiful, Betsy ventured, seeing what the others didn't. The tall rolling hills backed by a cloudless blue sky, the green-gray grass and its heady scent of wild sage. She saw the huge shade trees that would help keep the house cool in summer, and the apple trees in a small grove not far to the left of where they stood. I'm going to explore. Taking her bags to the creaking porch, Betsy set them down and opened the door to her new home. At first, she hesitated, seeing the tracks in the dust of small animals who had nested there in the years since its first inhabitants departed, but then she saw the enormous promise. A huge fieldstone fireplace stood in the main room, with a stack of firewood set neatly by. A sturdy table and chairs hadn't begun to rot away, and there were dishes and cups in the cupboards, pots and pans hanging from the ceiling. A cooking stove, also with wood piled next to it, appeared ready to bake a cake. She ventured into the rooms, finding solid chairs and beds, obviously needing new mattresses and linens, and cupboards that could be filled with clothes. A cedar chest lay in one room, and inside, still fresh despite the mothball scent, were linens and towels. Walking out the back door, Betsy made another interesting discovery. A huge garden, planted an unknown time ago, still held the germinating vegetables beginning to grow amidst the weeds with the onset of summer. She wandered to the barn, which, like the house, needed repair, but she found as much potential there as in the house. Stalls for horses and cows, a gray-boarded wagon, a plow, leather harnesses hanging from the walls that required a heavy oiling but were still usable. Outside the barn, she discovered a coop for chickens, and a large boarded square pen with troughs for pigs. Feral cats, dozens of them, ran in panic from her approach, but she recognized the potential with them as well. Cats kept mice and rats and snakes away. She returned to the house, finding her mother's tears had dried. She was busily inspecting the kitchen. Papa and Brett walked to the fields, talking and gesturing, while Johnny found a serviceable broom and had started sweeping. "Ma," Betsy said. "Come here. See the garden." "Garden?" Ma followed her out the back door, gaping at the expanse of weed-choked rows of beans, squash, carrots, onions, peppers, and more. Betsy figured they merely needed tending to complete their full growth. "This is a gift from God," Ma said, her tone hushed. "The barn needs mending, Ma, as does the house," Betsy went on, excited. "Don't cry any more, please. We can work hard and make this place a home." In an unexpected and rare gesture, her mother seized her in a fierce hug and kissed her cheek. "I think you're right, Betsy," she murmured, holding Betsy tight. "Jane!" Papa hollered, his tone more excited than his daughter's. "There's wheat already bursting from the soil. Must have been planted years ago and kept regenerating. And I found bags of seed corn in the root cellar. Those cats out there kept the rodents down so well there is hardly any loss. We must pray it will sprout. And a river, Ma." Brett half yelled, pointing toward the east. "Maybe the Plum River. Enough water to swim in." Ma burst out laughing. "Let's get to it, boys. There's work to be done." Chapter 5. To say the next several weeks were easy was not the least bit true. Despite the many blessings the Coe family found on their homestead, many problems burst forth to discourage them. Food was a scarcity, and the garden and fields were far from ready to be harvested. While Papa and Brett worked the fields, dealing with varmints, hoeing weeds, and planting a new crop of corn, Ma and Betsy cleaned and repaired the house, stuffed old sacks with corn husks for mattresses and tended the garden. That left young Johnny the task of finding food for them all. His young body, quick, agile and quiet, snared rabbits and shot wild turkeys with Papa's old rifle, gathered wild onions, acorns, piñon nuts, and never failed to bring home something for their supper. He even brought home a thick, heavy rattlesnake that, after a cry of disgust from Ma, was turned into a tasty stew. His resourcefulness was so great, in fact, that Papa took Johnny's kills to town to trade for chickens and a single suckling pig. One day in mid-May, Betsy and Brett were charged with taking Johnny's rabbit pelts to Plum River. Mr. Jones, on one of his trips past their homestead, told them of a man who would trade their pelts for a milk cow. Starting out early in the morning before the day's stifling heat struck them, they bore the pelts on their backs and walked the 5 miles into town. There they struck the bargain with the trader, and he passed them the rope tied to the halter of a mild-eyed cow busy chewing her cud. The cow seemed healthy enough, and Brett whispered to Betsy he thought she was with calf. "Do you think he would have parted with her if he knew?" Betsy whispered back, watching the trader admire the pelts. "I don't know," Brett replied. "Let's go." They tied their new cow outside the Johnsons' mercantile beside saddled horses and went inside. Papa had given them some of their precious savings to buy salt, sugar, flour, and shells for the old rifle. As they walked inside, Betsy halted, stunned, unable to walk forward. Carson Davis stood behind the counter, minus his hat, his hair tied neatly at the nape of his neck and his smile for her as bright as the sun outside. "Miss Coe," he said, his blue eyes shining. "How good to see you again." "Mr. Davis," she stammered. "I'm happy to see you, of course. But, what of your cattle ranch?" "Still working on that, ma'am," he said. "Meanwhile, I'm working and saving money. I'll get there, one day." While Brett ordered the supplies they needed, Betsy stood back, pretending to admire bolts of cloth. She secretly watched Carson as he worked, noticing the rapid glances he shot her, wishing she could spend a little time talking to him. When Brett announced he needed to water their cow before the return trek and departed, Betsy found her chance. With no other customers waiting, Betsy walked to the counter. She had no idea what to say to him, despite the words she wanted to say regarding how glad she was to see him. He gave her an opening. There is a barn dance Saturday night, he said. Will I see you there? I'm not sure, she answered. Where is it? Here, he replied, his blue eyes on hers. Mr. Johnson's barn. It's the big red one behind the store. I'll ask my parents, but they will want a chaperone. Betsy coughed, blushing, unable to meet his eyes. We don't have much money to stay at the hotel. Perhaps Mrs. Johnson will serve as chaperone, Carson said. Wait here, I'll go ask. With that, he ducked behind the curtain that led to the back of the store. Within minutes, he returned with a short, plump woman with rosy cheeks. She came around the front of the counter, her hands extended and a warm smile on her face. Hello, dear. I'm Mrs. Johnson, she said. You are the Coe's girl? Yes, ma'am. I'm Betsy. Tell your folks that I will proud to chaperone you at the dance. Unless they're wanting to come, too, she said, her blue eyes twinkling. I am so fond of Carson here, and he's told me so much about you. Betsy blushed again, shooting a quick glance at Carson. I don't know what to say. I'll not only chaperone you, dear, but you are welcome to stay the night in our home. Betsy's excitement grew. Really? That would be wonderful. It will so good to have a young lady around, even for a short while. My girls are all grown and married. Mrs. Johnson glanced between Betsy and Carson, and her smile widened. You should be thinking of marriage, Betsy. You are such a pretty thing. Any man would be proud to marry a good girl like you. Betsy ducked her head, squirming with embarrassment. Brett came back in the front door and picked up a few of their parcels. Betsy, it's getting late. The cow is watered, and we have a long way to walk. Reluctantly, Betsy pulled her hands from Mrs. Johnson's, and offered Carson a short wave in farewell. I hope my parents will let me come, she said. She gathered the rest of their purchases, backing toward the door to keep Carson in sight as long as possible. I hope so, too, Carson said. I'm sure they will, Mrs. Johnson said. Now be careful going home. Remember the snakes. Brett eyed her sidelong as she departed the store, hefting his sack over his broad shoulder. What was that about? There's a dance Saturday night, she replied as Brett untied the cow's rope. Mrs. Johnson offered to chaperone me. Brett's eyes lit up. I want to go, too, he said. Papa and Ma will approve as long as you have a chaperone. I can stay the night at their house, too. The cow followed Brett willingly down the packed dirt street, her udder swinging, as the pair continued to talk about the upcoming dance. Chapter 6. Saturday arrived, and both Betsy and Brett worked hard to finish their chores by mid-afternoon. Betsy put on an old, nearly worn-out dress and sunbonnet, carefully packing her best dress and a pretty straw hat strewn with flowers into a gunny sack. She would change clothes once she got into town. Brett did the same and inserted a smaller sack of fresh baked bread and cookies into his bag that Ma handed him. Give this to Mrs. Johnson, now, Ma said. To say thank you for her hospitality. I imagine that nice Mr. Duggan will be at the dance. I reckon so, Ma, Betsy replied, giving her mother a quick hug in farewell. Of course, she neglected to mention that Carson was going to be there, too. And of the two men, she was miles more excited to see Carson. Mind your manners, now, Papa said, his tone gruff. We will. Brett led the way down the drive, past the cow grazing in her paddock and the fields growing green and tall. Johnny waved to them from the garden where he worked hoeing weeds. It took them almost 2 hours to walk the distance to Plum River, but Betsy felt she floated on air. She was going to dance with Carson without her parents' disapproval hanging over her. At that moment, she had never felt happier. She delivered the package to Mrs. Johnson, who insisted she come in and wash before changing into her best dress. Then I will brush your hair and tie a few ribbons in it, the matronly woman stated firmly. Child, you will have the eye of every man there. The Johnson barn was huge and decorated with flowers and buntings. 3 men with gray beards stood in a corner tuning their fiddles. The music and dancing hadn't started yet, but there were still many people both inside and outside the barn, talking, laughing, exchanging news or gossip. Betsy stood just inside the huge doors, uncertain, searching for Carson. Mrs. Johnson had left her side to join other ladies in hats and sunbonnets standing near one of the few tables set up against the walls. Travis Duggan approached her. Wearing his black frock coat, black trousers, and a bowler, he took the hat off and offered her a little bow. "How do you do, Miss Coe?" he asked. "It is good to see you again." Betsy felt a little dismayed to see him first, and even more dismayed at the attention he paid her. "How do you do, Mr. Duggan?" "May I pay you a compliment, Miss Coe?" he asked, his dark eyes staring earnestly down into hers. "You are a breathtakingly beautiful woman." "Thank you, Mr. Duggan," Betsy said, her eyes flicking here and there, searching for Carson, feeling more uncomfortable by the minute. "Please, call me Travis." "I'm sorry, but we've only just met. I feel like I've known you all my life." "I do not believe that is an appropriate statement to make, Mr. Duggan." He smiled, his fine white teeth gleaming. Despite her misgivings, his smile entranced her. "Even if it's the truth?" "Well, Just then, Betsy saw Carson emerge from behind a group of men talking and smoking their pipes just outside the door. Her face warmed at the sight of his rugged handsomeness, and her spirits soared. Yet, he did not return her smile, for he had obviously noticed she was not alone. "Do you know that vagabond?" Travis Duggan asked, following her gaze. Betsy rounded on him, huffing in annoyance. "Mr. Davis is hardly a vagabond. He traveled to Plum River on the same coach as my family and me. If you would call him thus, then you should apply that title to me as well. I merely meant he is not a suitable candidate for you." Her annoyance grew into anger. She was too flustered to even respond to such a brazen statement. Duggan gestured around the barn and its occupants. "As you very well know by now, there are very few marriageable ladies here in Plum River," he said. "I, myself, advertised for a mail-order bride. I found what I thought was a nice girl from a good family, but she never came west. But I dare say," and here he looked at her with pointed intent, "you stepped out of the coach in her place." Thinking of how close she had come to becoming a mail-order bride herself, Betsy faltered for a moment. I see," she stammered. "But as you must know, I am not the bride you asked to come west. I will choose my own husband." "I can offer you much," Duggan persisted, drawing closer to her, his breath tickling the skin of her throat. "I have a prosperous business. I have no small standing in this town. Now, considering that Carson fellow, he merely works as a clerk for Old Man Johnson." "So, you were born with the silver spoon in your mouth, sir?" Betsy asked archly. "Or did you not fight and scratch to where you are now?" When Duggan flushed and glanced away, Betsy knew he was disgruntled. She felt her cheeks flush. She hadn't been raised to be rude. "I'm sorry, Mr. Duggan. I spoke out of turn. However, I will marry the man of my choice, and I will pray and wait for God's direction." Determined not to let her sparring match with Travis Duggan drag her spirits down, Betsy moved away across the barn toward Carson. Though he did not smile, his expression lightened, and he tipped his Stetson to her. "Miss Coe," he said, his southern drawl sending shivers down her spine. "I am honored you came." "Please," she said, feeling a surge of courage. "If I may call you Carson, will you call me Betsy?" "I would like that very much," he said, smiling. "Betsy." She slipped her arm through his, noticing Mrs. Johnson's sharp eye on them, but sensing no disapproval in her expression. They walked across the barn floor and the sawdust, Betsy feeling awkward and shy one minute and thrilled the next. "Will you tell me how these barn dances work? I have never been to one before." "I reckon they are more popular in Kentucky and out west than they are in Ohio," he said, giving her question serious weight. "Well, now, the fiddle players play, and we all dance in a line, changing partners as we go down the line." "So, everyone dances with everyone?" "I reckon that covers it, yes, ma'am." "Will you show me some of the steps?" Carson grinned. "I'd be obliged, Betsy." Thus, without music and with many eyes watching, Carson showed Betsy the steps, her hands in his. He laughed as Betsy erupted into a fit of giggles when she got the steps wrong or stumbled over his boots. He corrected her, and she tried again and again, before finally getting it right. Applause sounded throughout the barn, and Betsy blushed, while grinning unabashedly. Thus, when the fiddle players tapped their boots on the wood floor of the barn, and townsfolk stepped into line, Betsy was ready. Chapter 7. Betsy danced down the line to the fiddle players' music, holding her skirts with one hand while she crossed arms with whomever danced opposite her. Sometimes it was Carson, other times Duggan, but most of the time it was with men she'd never met. She'd even danced a few turns with her brother. But all had smiles on their faces, all behaved as though they liked her, and all enjoyed the evening for what it was, camaraderie. A break in the dancing came, and the fiddle players set their fiddles down. Betsy sat in a chair near Mrs. Johnson, gasping for breath and laughing with the excitement of it all. Carson left to fetch her a sweet cake and iced tea, and Mrs. Johnson patted her arm affectionately. "You make such a lovely couple, you and our Carson." "Your Carson?" Mrs. Johnson smiled sadly. "Johnson and I lost our only boy a long time ago to scarlet fever. When Carson came to ask for work, how could we refuse? If our son had lived, he'd be the same age as Carson is now." Her eyes hardened a fraction as she stared at Betsy. "I saw Travis Duggan paying court to you." Betsy shifted uncomfortably, not used to such frank talk with people she'd only just met. Mrs. Johnson went on. "Much as I hate to say it, Travis Duggan is a good man. Solid. A pillar of the community. He's a fine choice as a husband." A husband. Did everything out west move so swiftly? "But Carson will be something someday, you mark my words. So when the time comes for you to make your choice, you follow your heart. You understand me?" Mrs. Johnson stared at her. Betsy rose from her chair and then bent down and hugged the old woman. "Yes, ma'am, I will." Carson appeared with cake and tea for both of them. "My two favorite ladies in the world," he said. Betsy and Mrs. Johnson shared a quick, amused glance as Carson set both cups and small plates in front of them. Betsy, minding her manners, sat back down and picked up her fork and only ate after Mrs. Johnson started. The cake was delicious, and the tea ice cold. She found herself enjoying Carson's company immensely as he regaled the two of them with tales from his boyhood in Kentucky. She wondered if he felt the same connection to her. As his face was turned more toward Mrs. Johnson than herself, she took a moment to study his profile. While she never paid serious thought to a man's looks, she found herself liking Carson's. His eyes, wide and blue, and his easy smile entranced her. She thought of Travis Duggan and mentally compared the two of them. Duggan's eyes reminded her of a hawk staring at its prey, and his expression did not have such a sweet, natural way about it. Duggan, as a husband, would probably treat her well, but marriage to him simply didn't appeal to her. Perhaps if she got to know him better. Yet when Betsy thought of the possibility of marriage to Carson, she strongly suspected it would be a joy. Carson's eyes met hers, and Betsy quickly looked away, her face heating. When she dared glance back, she found him watching her, a strange longing in his expression. Could it be that he was interested in courting her? And if so, would he ask? Maybe even that very night? "The fiddlers are back," Mrs. Johnson announced. "Betsy, it's going on 8 o'clock. You have 1 more hour to dance, and then you come home with me." "Yes, ma'am." Mrs. Johnson looked on approvingly when Betsy permitted Carson to take her hand and escort her to the dance floor. As the music began, the other dancers joined them, and Betsy found herself opposite Travis Duggan. Somehow, he'd managed to insert himself between her and Carson. Carson stood by, annoyance darkening his features, yet he was evidently too much of a gentleman to create a scene. "I would like to share in your company, Miss Coe," Travis said, his smile much less forced than what she had seen before. "Permit me to overwhelm you with my charms." Betsy nodded helplessly, not knowing what else to do. Travis Duggan danced with infinite grace, and his unflagging attention was appealing despite her earlier aversion to him. She blushed under his attentions, and his whispers in her ear of town gossip was both entertaining and informative. Perhaps I misjudged him, she thought, her face turned up to his as they danced. He was good-looking in his dark way, and his eyes no longer reminded her of a predator's. She thawed to his advances more than she ever thought she would or could. Mrs. Johnson interrupted them with a quick smile to Travis. "Mr. Duggan, Betsy here is young and this is her first dance. She must come home with me now as I am her chaperone. It's late." "Of course, Mrs. Johnson," Travis said, offering the old dame a quick bow. "May I have the honor of escorting you home?" "No, thank you kindly, Mr. Duggan," Mrs. Johnson said firmly. "We have an escort." That escort was of course Carson, who awaited them at the barn's huge doors. He had no smile for Betsy, and she felt a twinge of guilt for enjoying herself with Travis. Arm in arm with Mrs. Johnson, Betsy felt confused. Never in her life had she even had one man vying for her attention, and she feared that having two men interested had gone to her head. She now liked both men, and she decided that either of them would make a fine beau. But there was still something about Carson that drew her. She reminded herself that Carson hadn't yet stepped forward other than asking her to dance, while Travis had made his intentions clear. She wished the situation were reversed, that it was Carson who had spoken so pointedly to her. It wasn't far to the Johnson home, and Carson said little on their short walk. At the doorstep, he looked into Betsy's face and offered her a small smile. "Good night then, Miss Coe," he said. He nodded to Mrs. Johnson. "And to you, ma'am." With that, he turned and walked away. The darkness of the night swallowed him. Betsy stared after him, then turned to Mrs. Johnson. "Where is he going?" "Home," she replied. "To his homestead." Alarm filled her. "But, it's too dangerous to walk across the prairie at night. There are snakes and wolves and—" Mrs. Johnson sighed, and ushered Betsy in through her door. "Yes, dear, it is. But you can't stop a man from doing what he feels he must." Chapter 8. The next weeks flew past as spring changed into full-fledged summer with its fierce heat. Enough rain had fallen on the Coe crops during the spring that the summer's winds failed to dry up and blow their future away. On the night of the dance, Brett had discovered that the government had posted a bounty on coyote pelts. As Papa had worried about the coyotes killing their chickens and their single young pig, he encouraged both boys to hunt the varmints down and skin them. Every night they managed to kill at least one. Their hides were cut away and cured, but as their meat was useless, the corpses were left for the carrion birds. Then came one hot day when Johnny came running back from the fields, yelling for all he was worth. Ma and Betsy ran to the door, fearing he'd been snake-bit. But his yells emanated from excitement, not panic. "Buffalo," he yelled, dashing up onto the porch. His loud voice brought both Papa and Brett from the barn where they were working making repairs. "Papa, the buffalo are here." "Thanks be to God," Papa breathed, closing his eyes. Betsy knew what that meant. The meat from a single buffalo might keep them fed for months. They would smoke the meat and store it in the cool root cellar. The cured hide could be cut into warm blankets for their beds that winter. If they could kill more than one. "Johnny, fetch the rifle," Papa ordered. "You're the best shot." "Brett, fetch cutting knives and the travois." "Jane, you and Betsy are needed to help cut the beast up." Thus encumbered, they followed young Johnny out past their fields toward the open prairie. More than a mile beyond their land, they saw the immense dust cloud that heralded the arrival of a vast herd. Papa instructed Ma and Betsy to wait atop a small hill and remain quiet. Taking the boys with him, Papa crouched low, hiding amidst the tall grass as they silently approached the buffalo. Betsy had heard tales of how the buffalo could stampede at the slightest noise and how quickly they could turn on a hunter. Even a wounded buffalo had no fear, and its charge was deadly. She held her breath as her men stalked the grazing herd, almost invisible in the now tall grass. Papa's hand pointed. The rifle barked. Bellowing, the huge herd bolted, kicking up enough dust from the ground to create a thick fog that Betsy couldn't see through. The ground vibrated under the massive pounding of hooves as the buffalo stampeded into the west. As the vibration died away, the air slowly began to clear. Papa and the boys stood up, staring at the brown mound that lay a short distance ahead. Whooping with glee, Brett and Johnny ran toward the dead buffalo. Papa raised his arm and gestured for Betsy and Ma to come down from the hill. It took a long time to skin and cut up the huge beast, load it onto the travois and drag it back to the farm. Darkness had fallen by the time they arrived home, and yet the work had only begun. Papa and Brett tacked the hide to the barn wall as Ma started a fire in the smokehouse. She set aside some roasts to cook the next day for their meal, but the rest was hung on hooks to slowly cure in the thick smoke of the green mesquite wood. Midnight had passed before they finished, and Betsy was too tired to eat anything. She climbed into her bed and slept like a dead thing. The Coe family killed enough buffalo over the next weeks to not just keep them fed all winter and enough hides to keep them warm, they now had meat in plenty to trade in Plum River. They obtained more chickens for their coop, and 3 more pigs as well as necessities such as salt, sugar, flour, shells, and coffee. The coyote hides brought enough money on their bounties to permit Papa to buy a strong mule from Mr. Jones. Thus, Betsy and Brett, sometimes with Papa or Johnny, made regular journeys to town. And it gave Betsy time to visit with both Carson and Travis. Loaded with freshly smoked buffalo meat, she, Brett, and young Johnny stepped through the door of Johnson's Mercantile. Carson greeted her warmly. "Welcome, Betsy. Boys. What do y'all have there?" "Freshly smoked buffalo," Johnny stated proudly. "I shot it." "Aren't you the fine marksman?" Mrs. Johnson said, coming from the back and wiping her hands on a towel. "How about a piece of horehound candy for the sharpshooter?" Johnny grinned as she handed him a fair-sized chunk of candy. "Of course, we'll take the meat," she told Betsy and Brett. "We sell out of your meat faster than you can bring it in." "Our Ma is a dab hand at smoking," Brett said. "Please return to her our compliments," Mrs. Johnson said. "Will she come to town for the Independence Day festival?" "I would love to see her and pay my respects in person." "We can ask, ma'am," Brett answered. "When is it?" "This Friday, of course," Carson said, his blue eyes on Betsy. "There's a horse race. Mr. Jones is lending me his filly to run in it. The prize is $50. Betsy's eyes went round. $50. "Think of how many cows I can buy with that," Carson said, his eyes shining. "That much will get me 4 good cows and a breeding bull." "How good is the filly?" Brett asked. "Mr. Jones says she's fast. But he also said she can be flighty. She's young, and spooks easy. As she gets older, she'll settle down." "I heard Mr. Duggan has the fastest horse in Plum River," Johnny said around the mound of candy in his mouth. Carson merely shrugged, grinning. "The filly hasn't run against his yet, now, has she?" "I guess not." "I hope you win," Betsy said without thinking. "Will you be there to cheer me on?" "Of course," she answered. "I'm sure Papa and Ma will both want to come." "Now, folks, down to business," Mrs. Johnson said. "What do you need in trade?" Chapter 9. Emerging from the store burdened with sacks of flour, salt, coffee, and sugar, as well as nails to make repairs to the buildings, the 3 loaded it all onto the rickety wagon drawn by the new mule. Having the mule meant more trips to town and more opportunities to trade for the things they needed. The buffalo herd had returned to their grazing grounds every few days, offering more opportunities for a kill, and thus, the skins and smoked meat. Betsy felt the family to be as rich as Midas with so much food in the root cellar, without even taking into consideration the grains, corn, and vegetables that still ripened in the fields and garden. Their house was cozy and sheltered from the severe heat by the trees, and well as properly repaired against summer storms and the coming winter. They had chickens and their eggs, a cow bursting with calf who gave milk twice a day, a mule for traveling and working in the fields, and the summer sun that ripened the corn and wheat. Though the work harvesting a single buffalo was brutal, it was worth it to have the meat to trade. Johnny still shot the pesky coyotes, who were drawn to the tempting chickens, and put the cash he made into a jar in Ma and Papa's room. As Brett loaded the last sack into the wagon, and Betsy sat on the high seat, Travis Duggan walked past. Though he pretended surprise, Betsy suspected that he had sighted them from his office down the street and emerged just so he could speak with Betsy. She wasn't sure if that counted a point for him or against him. From the corner of her eye, she saw Carson at the window of the store, watching. "Greetings to you, fair maiden," H said, his tone expansive. "You have a new mule?" Betsy nodded, but it was Brett who spoke. He lifted Johnny to the wagon where he'd sit atop the sacks on the return journey, and said, "Yes." Johnny shot enough coyotes to pay for him. Travis whistled. "That's a lot of varmints to shoot, son." "I know that mule. No one else could afford to buy him, and he's been for sale for a long time." "I'm a good shot," Johnny said, then turned away to get comfortable on his sacks. He continued to suck his horehound candy. Brett climbed to the seat and lifted the heavy reins. He gave Betsy a few moments to say something to Travis if she wanted to. She smiled at Travis, and he took her hand. She shifted in her seat, uncomfortable, but unsure of how to take back her hand without appearing too rude. He kissed her knuckles, gazing up at her with affection clear in his dark eyes. "Will you come for the holiday festival this Friday, Miss Coe?" "I think so," she murmured, conscious of Carson watching them. She withdrew her hand. "We're going to try to get Papa and Ma to come. I hope you bring them," he continued. "I'd love to renew my acquaintance with your folks." "Brett, Ma and Papa will be expecting us," Betsy said, suddenly eager to cut this conversation off. She was painfully aware of Carson watching her from the mercantile window. Brett clucked to the mule and slapped his shaggy rump with the heavy reins, and the mule trotted down the street in the direction of home. As she turned to face the front, Brett glowered down at her. "What's wrong with you?" Betsy asked. "I hope you're seriously considering sending that guy a no-thank-you letter." Betsy stared at him. "A no-thank-you letter?" Brett sighed. "He's no good for you, sis. He may have standing in the town, but he's not right for you." "Papa and Ma like him," Johnny piped up. "That don't mean nothing," Brett warned, his eyes dark as he stared at Betsy. "They don't know him." Betsy had been thinking the very same thing, but she didn't appreciate her brother's high-handed ways. "And you do?" Despite her instant need to defend herself, somehow her heart wasn't in it. "I've heard talk," Brett said. "He had a wife once. She left him. Back in St. Louis, from what I heard. He came west, desperate to replace her. I don't like him, even if those rumors aren't true." "Neither do I," said Johnny. "He makes my teeth itch." Betsy stared over her shoulder. "How can he make your teeth itch?" Johnny merely shrugged. Finding it odd that both her brothers held a strange animosity against Travis, she felt the need to ask, "Do you like Carson?" Brett grinned. "I like him. He's good enough for you." "Why?" "He doesn't make my teeth itch," Johnny stated. "I like him, too." She glanced at Brett. "But, why?" "I'm not sure," Brett said slowly, thinking. "I just like the guy. Wouldn't mind him as a brother-in-law. It's hard to explain." Betsy looked at him, surprised at his thoughts. For some reason, she pushed the issue. "You might like Travis, too, if you gave him a chance." "Nope." Both her brothers spoke at the same time and with the same emphasis. Brett glanced to her, smiling. "I saw you with Carson, remember? Seems like you belong with him." "I saw it in the stagecoach, too." "Me, too," Johnny said. "Ma didn't like him much, though." "Nor did Papa," Brett added and spat over the side of the wagon. "Just don't choose that Travis." Betsy stared ahead, wondering how all this conversation led to her choosing between the two men. It was ridiculous, really, as if she were at a party or somewhere, and choosing a prize. The two men would probably scoff at such absurdity. "Pick Carson," Johnny muttered, folding his hands behind his head and shutting his eyes. "You know you want to." Betsy watched the green hills passing by, thinking about what her brothers had just said. She didn't disagree with them, or with their assessment of Carson and herself together. Being with Carson certainly felt right, which was uncanny. However, Carson had not yet given her any indication he wanted to court her. What if he wanted to marry someone else or not even marry at all? Carson doesn't want to marry me, she ventured at last. Course he does, Johnny said from the rear while Brett looked askance at her. What makes you say that? Brett asked. Shrugging, she stifled her doubt. Let's talk about something else. Give Carson time, Brett said, his tone more confident than she felt. Chapter 10. I don't know, Ma said, her tone hesitant when Betsy and her brothers told her about the Independence Day festival and horse race. We have so much work to do. There's 2 hides that need curing, the weeds are overgrowing the garden again, and the chicken coop needs to be mended before the foxes steal all our chickens. Betsy looked away, feeling tears of disappointment sting her eyes. Papa came in, clearly having overheard Ma's refusal. While he very seldom showed anyone affection, he put his arm around Ma's shoulder and squeezed it. Come now, Jane, he said, smiling. It's one day. All of us have worked so hard over the last months, it's past time we took a little break. It's also neighborly. We should get to know the people here in Plum River. Ma bit her lip, her expression still doubtful. Why, I don't even have a dress I wouldn't be ashamed to be seen in. Ma, you have that pretty pink and white dress, Betsy claimed, her spirits rising at Papa's words. Child, that has a great tear in it. I'll sew it for you. Please, Ma. As Brett and Johnny chimed in with their own pleas, Ma finally smiled and nodded. All right. All right. Quit both Aaron and me. As long as everyone's chores are finished. Papa kissed her cheek amid the whoops of excitement. Brett, let's get that wagon unloaded. Johnny, fetch your fishing pole. I saw some huge trout in the river the other day, and I know your ma has been hankering for some good fried fish. The morning of July 4th dawned bright and sunny, and found the Coe family in the rickety wagon headed for Plum River. Betsy wore her Sunday best bonnet and pale blue dress. She thought her mother never looked prettier in the pink and white gown and matching hat. Papa and the boys wore their best clothes, and even the mule had been curried until his coat shone. As the trotting mule brought them closer to town, other families in carts or buckboards from nearby farms joined them on the road. Cowboys on horses tipped their hats to the ladies as they rode past. Plum River teemed with people. Men on horseback, others driving wagons, and some on foot streamed up and down the main street. The town's few women dressed in their brightly colored dresses strolled the wooden sidewalks, chatting with each other. Buntings hung from lamp posts and red, white, and blue streamers waved in the light breeze. Papa drove the mule down a side alley and reined him in. He helped Ma and Betsy down from the wagon and told Brett to water the mule. Water him every few hours, son, and if you find some shade for him, all the better. It's going to be a hot day. Here, he said gruffly, pulling his hand from his pocket. 25 cents for each of you. Betsy took her coins and put them in the pocket of her dress. Excited at the prospect of a day in town, she quickly kissed her parents and walked to the street. The horse race wasn't until later that afternoon, but the people around her talked of nothing else. She heard comments and judgments on Duggan's bay horse, the Jones filly, a gray gelding, and a few snipes about a spavined nag that allegedly won races all over Wyoming Territory. Among the townsfolk, it seemed, Duggan's horse was favored to win. She encountered Travis himself on the sidewalk as he emerged from his newspaper office. His smile was immediate and wide. Miss Coe. You did come. Are your folks here? Why yes, Mr. Duggan, she said, unable to help wondering why he asked for them so quickly. Though I'm not sure where they are right now. He slid her arm through his. I'm sure we'll bump into them. I wish to pay my respects. Would you like to see my horse? He's the favorite to win this afternoon. She pulled her arm from his, not willing to be seen as such in public. Why, the entire town would think that they were already promised. Travis looked at her questioningly when she removed her arm but said nothing. The big bay was tied up nearby, wearing his saddle. He bent his head to sniff Betsy's fingers. While she didn't know much about prized horseflesh, she admired his strong legs, powerful neck and hugely rounded hindquarters. She rubbed the horse's face, looking up into the soft brown eyes. "He's beautiful." "He cost $20, Travis said. "If I win, he then pays for himself more than twice over." As he escorted her down the street amid the shouts and laughter, horses' hooves, and squeaky wheels of the wagons, Betsy had an uneasy sense that he intended to ask her to marry him that day. He mentioned her parents a few more times, and nattered on about this and that, hardly giving her a chance to talk. She was restless and more than once tried to politely dodge his company, but he didn't take the hint nor did he seem to even notice. In truth, she wanted to seek out Carson to not just wish him well in the race, but to give him the chance to perhaps declare some kind of intention toward her before Travis did. But as much as she looked for him, she didn't see him. There was no filly tied up outside the mercantile nor outside Mr. Jones' livery. She regained her freedom when several townsmen surrounded Travis and urged him back down the street so they could admire his horse and ask questions about his lines before they bet on him. As the men bore Travis away, Betsy went into the mercantile. Carson was not behind the counter, but Mrs. Johnson was. "Ma'am," Betsy began, "do you know where Carson is?" Mrs. Johnson frowned. "I believe he rode that red filly out to warm her up." "But the race will be starting soon," Betsy said, biting her lip. Where once excitement filled her spirit, now a strange foreboding gnawed at it. Carson should be there, and he wasn't. "Don't you worry, Betsy. He'll be back in time for the race." Chapter 11. Betsy went outside into the noon heat, hoping to locate Carson before Travis found her again. As she walked, greeting people she knew, she kept a sharp watch for a tall chestnut. Instead, she saw Travis talking to her parents, the reins of his bay in his hand. They hadn't seen her, and she quickly turned to walk the other way. Where was Carson? Concern nagged at her. While she didn't know horse breeding, she did know it didn't take long to warm one up. At last, the 8 contestants rode their horses to the far edges of town, and the main street was quickly cleared. The horses would run from one end to the other in a wild sprint, the fastest crossing the line first. Betsy took a spot in the middle of town near the livery, watching the horses in the distance line up. Had Carson appeared? At that distance, she couldn't be sure. A gun went off. Yells and shouts filled the air amid the thundering hooves of the racing horses. As they galloped past her, their manes and tails flying like banners, she saw Travis on his bay in the lead. There was no chestnut among the racing horses. Betsy spun around, knowing something must have happened for Carson to miss the race. He wanted that winning money too badly to have not shown up. Nothing save terrible trouble would have stopped him. Hoisting her skirts, she ran toward the livery, hoping to find a saddled horse she could borrow. Maybe Mr. Jones had one available for a customer. Dashing into the barn, she stopped dead, gasping in horror. The tall red filly stood there, saddled, her reins trailing in the dust. Wasn't this the horse Travis was going to ride? The animal blew hard, nostrils flaring wide and pink, foam white on her neck and chest under her breast collar. Her heaving flanks were soaked in sweat, rivulets streaming under her belly. Betsy grabbed the young mare's reins, and turned her, looking for something she could stand on to mount. Though her skirts were not split for riding, she made do as best she could as she settled into the saddle, grateful that she'd had some experience with riding in her past. Kicking the horse into a swift trot, she rode into the street, now filling back up with wagons, horses, and people. Ignoring them, she urged the filly into a gallop, heading out of town. Shouts followed her, demanding to know where she was going. She was certain she heard Travis's voice and her parents among them. While she had no real idea where to look for Carson, she loosened the reins, giving the horse her head. If Carson had been warming the horse, he most probably would have chosen flat ground to put the filly through her paces. Betsy slapped the reins across the wet flanks, sending the horse into a dead run down the lane. She held on tightly and swung her head from side to side, hoping to spot Carson, fear gnawing at her gut. She'd never ridden a horse this fast before, all she knew was that she had to get to Carson. "Carson," she yelled. Carson. Though she shouted his name, she didn't know if she would hear him respond over the sound of the mare's hooves. Reining the gasping horse into a steady lope, she called Carson's name several more times. Leaving the road, she turned to ride across the prairie, often retreating to ride in the other direction. Back and forth she cantered, shouting until her voice was raw. Over here. His voice carried across the light breeze. Motion caught her eye, and she saw his arm wave. Urging the horse toward him, Betsy's mouth grew dry with fear. Carson sat with his back to a rock, dusty and sweating, near a dry ravine. Flinging herself from the saddle before the horse even stopped, she knelt beside him. What happened? You're hurt. Carson tried to grin through his pain. Yep. Think my legs broke. Been trying to crawl, but ain't making much headway. What happened? Betsy bent to his injured leg, seeing the bulge on his shin beneath his trousers. I will need to splint that. That there filly spooked, Carson said. Rattlesnake. A bit too fresh, I reckon. I wasn't paying enough attention and off I went. Here. Betsy shifted to grab the mare's reins and shove them into Carson's hand as she rose. Looking around the ground, she found some sturdy sticks she could use to make a splint. Tearing off pieces of her petticoat, she bound his leg. He hissed in pain, and sweat trickled down his face, but his blue eyes never stopped watching her. You'll make someone a good wife, Miss Betsy. Or a nurse. He laughed weakly. She glanced at his face, then back to her work. You think so? She murmured. He grimaced and shifted his leg with a groan. Betsy? He looked into her eyes. I don't have much to offer you yet. I have enough money saved for a couple of cows. That's all. Betsy slowly met his gaze. What exactly are you saying? She asked, hardly daring to hope. He managed a small smile. I fell in love with you right from the start. If I had more to offer. Ever stop to think that maybe I would marry you anyway? No, ma'am, he said, his smile fading. I didn't. Well, you're a fool, then. She finished tying his splint and rocked back on her knees. He was so handsome, lying there even in his pain. A surge of tenderness for him filled her. If you ask me, you might be surprised at my answer. Carson took her hand in his and kissed it. Betsy, will you marry me? Will you help me start my ranch, bear my children, and be my wife? Tears filled her eyes and she laughed. Yes, I will. Does that mean I can kiss you now? Betsy smoothed Carson's hair from his face and bent toward him. He grabbed her other hand and brought her close. His lips brushed hers with such tenderness that she gasped softly. His arms went around her, pulling her even closer. Thank you, he whispered against her mouth. She drew back slightly and looked at him. For what? For being who you are. For taking a chance on me. She nuzzled against his neck and breathed in his scent. There's nowhere I'd rather be than with you, she said, knowing her words were completely true. Me, neither. He kissed her again, his mouth exploring hers with a fervor she was happy to match. And Betsy? You're gonna have to let that Travis guy down. She laughed. Yes, I guess I will. He hugged her tightly to his chest. My folks might not be too pleased, she warned him after they had broken apart. I'll win them over, he assured her with a grin. You know, I believe you will, she replied with a warm chuckle. The end. Thank you for listening to this heartwarming story by Susannah Calloway. You can be assured that all her books are clean and wholesome. To find other romances by Susannah Calloway, as well as the other authors at Tika House Publishing, visit www.tikahousepublishing.com. Remember to hit like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next Susannah Calloway Western romance.